Good day and warm greetings from Tokyo. It's my great honor to provide a keynote speech in the presence of our stellar panelists and moderator. As you see in the flyer for this panel, the organizer argues that infrastructure plays a key role in recoupling economic, social, and environmental prosperity. This argument is based on the work of the T20 Infrastructure Task Force. I hope that it will impact the decisions made by the G20 Infrastructure Working Group. Please allow me to share some of my thoughts on the recoupling. Although the world faces the worst recession since the Great Depression, the reason why infrastructure investment is so important today is very different from the principle of effective demand advocated by Keynes in the Great Depression's era. In many economies today, the recovery process is expected to be K-shaped. Some sectors will recover quickly, while other sectors will continue to suffer. Actually, consumption demand is very strong. People want to go on a spending spree. Investment demand related to digital transformation is also high. We are not observing a more severe demand shortage. What is needed is not increased demand, but social safety nets that help vulnerable groups and international macroeconomic policy coordination that postpones increases in interest rates. I think rather than short-run economic stimulus, it is much better for governments to undertake investment in infrastructure based on a much longer-term perspective to address climate risks, risks of future pandemics, the reduction of pollution, and the fight against cybercrime. These challenges are tough because they are global and arise from interconnection among people and businesses within and between countries. Because of these challenges, public and private funds on this planet are more scarce and more valuable than ever. So target investment projects should be selected carefully. Targets are those projects that have high rates of return from social, environmental, and economic points of view. Let's explore some targets. Poor rural populations remain concentrated on a remote and less favored land with low productivity. In such places, because of unsustainable farming practices and inappropriate agricultural technology, about 52% of farming land is moderately or severely degraded, and 24 billion tons of fertile soil are lost every year. If this problem is unchecked, almost 95% of agricultural land would be degraded, thereby posing a serious challenge to the food production system and eventually leading to food and nutritional insecurity for the poor. Poor farmers who cannot increase agricultural productivity are rapidly converting forest into farming land to support their livelihood. The conversion emits a large quantity of CO2. A key cause of soil degradation and deforestation is the limited use of appropriate agricultural technology and sustainable farming practices due to economic viability challenges. To stop large-scale environmental degradation, agriculture in remote rural areas needs to include processing, product differentiation, branding, and marketing. Investment in social infrastructure, such as skill formation and managerial capacity building, as well as investment in transportation and other physical infrastructure, must have a high rate of return, as it will greatly contribute to environmental sustainability, social inclusion, and rural development. I turn now from rural areas to sprawling large cities in developing countries. The outskirts of large cities, where poor, unskilled workers live, tend to have no urban planning, very unfavorable access to artery roads, healthcare, and safe water, and few job opportunities. Similar problems remain in some emerging economies. The provision of vocational training and healthcare, together with physical infrastructure investments based on proper urban planning, will have a high rate of return, as it addresses social inclusion and economic development. Such investments can address environmental sustainability as well. If vocational training, programs for unskilled workers, and physical infrastructure investment are designed and implemented to promote green circularity for adults. But what about the education of children in remote rural areas, including small islands, developing states, and the outskirts of large cities, where it is often difficult to have good teachers? If the digital divide could be bridged by greater investment in digital infrastructure, these areas would no longer be so disadvantageous. They would be able to produce a more competent labor force. In this way, social infrastructure can be infrastructure for both distribution and growth. Note that digital infrastructure has three aspects. One is physical equipment. A second is software or educational technology, also known as edtech. And the third is digital literacy. These aspects of digital infrastructure complement each other. This is a concrete example of the convergence of economic and social infrastructure and the convergence of physical and human capital investment, which was discussed by important report on social infrastructure made under the direction of the former president of the European Commission, Mr. Romano Prodi. The report argues that European Union suffered from significant underinvestment in social infrastructure in the previous decade. But in my view, this is not limited to the EU, but shared by other regions and economies, including Japan and many parts of the United States. I am curious about the views of the panelists. Energy, greenhouse gas emission, and the other issues directly related to climate change mitigation are worth discussing here. At the recent Global Climate Summit, United States President Joe Biden called the imperative of addressing climate change our generation's moonshot. I will not talk about it. Instead, I look forward to hearing the opinion of the panelists later. But this time, I will turn to infrastructure finance and international coordination and cooperation. I have three related points. First, a recent study by the Asian Development Bank Institute presents empirical evidence that those economies that are vulnerable to climate disasters, including extreme typhoons, hurricanes, and floods, are found to have higher costs of sovereign debt than less vulnerable economies. By this, I mean vulnerable states have to pay a premium in addition to the world market rates. The implication is that if vulnerable states fail to undertake sufficient adaptation investment, they would be even more vulnerable due to continuing global warming and face even higher borrowing costs. This would in turn make necessary investments more difficult for these states, potentially trapping them in a vicious circle and unsustainable debt burdens. To mitigate this risk, foreign aid and multilateral agreements are quite important. The second point is about the domestic resource mobilization and the international tax cooperation. Domestic resource mobilization is needed to increase the capacity of tax authorities in developing economies to collect taxes from residents and domestic firms. International Tax Cooperation refers to joint efforts to fight against BEPS, or base erosion and profit shifting, by multinational firms. Greater progress in these two areas could help to increase public funds for infrastructure investment. Finally, I'd like to emphasize that recoupling social, environmental, and economic prosperity makes infrastructure a truly global issue, and that public awareness of this change needs to be increased. Infrastructure used to serve local communities. Later, it was recognized to be critically important for the integration of local markets into the national market and for the growth of national economy. More recently, as national economies became integrated into the global economy, infrastructure investment became a global issue, though very little attention was paid to social demand and needs, local resources, and context. Today, we are advocating that infrastructure is critically important for the environmental, social, and economic prosperity of the planet. This spirit seems to be shared by current global talks about biodiversity and ecosystems, especially in the negotiation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. But many taxpayers and voters seem to have an outdated image of the role of infrastructure investment. Although they know that developing countries often build infrastructure in developing countries, they may believe that the purpose is driven by diplomatic competition. Such views could hinder recoupling and the great realignment. We should make greater efforts to boost public awareness so that the recoupling initiative for investment and development in the global north and south will serve as a driver for student-supported investments in future infrastructure systems. I hope our panelists will share their views about this point as well. Thank you for your attention.
Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening. I'm Nicolas Bouchou, delighted to welcome you for the discussion of this year's Global Solutions Summit on infrastructure, in close link with the discussions that are taking place within the T20 task force chaired by President Francesco Profumo on infrastructure investment and financing. But we can see also that the discussion on infrastructure goes far beyond the G20 and is one of the major issues within the G20. So our discussion today on infrastructure to recouple economic, social, and environmental prosperity, targets, governance, and financing. Let me just briefly introduce our panelists. Thank you, Riyatu Mariatu, Director of the Institute of Economy and Social Research at the University of Indonesia, right now in Jakarta. Arun Maira, the CEO of HelpAge International, a fellow of the Global Solutions Initiative and a former member of the Planning Commission of India and former India chairman of the Boston Consulting Group, now from India. Good afternoon, Arun. And Francesco Profumo, lead co-chair of the T20 Task Force on Infrastructure Investment, president of the Compagnia di San Paolo, chairman of the Fondazione Bruno Kessler in the Trento region. Welcome you all.
Thank you.
So infrastructure investment and the G20 agenda of growth and recovery are very closely linked since the 2008 financial crisis. Yet in recent years, including last year in 2020, a recurrent priority has been to address finance gaps, a gap so huge it was recently estimated at a US 15 trillion by 2040. That would be nearly 20% of the total world GDP of 2018. Then a provocative question: what if this gap was never to be filled? And what if such a gap, so huge, so recurrent, meant that we have collectively reached the limits of investments in connectivity solely for the purpose of growth, yet sometimes without the people? So my first question to our panel would be this one, an open question. Can the current COVID-19 crisis trigger a cycle of investments, not only in physical, but also in social and environmental infrastructure? First question, and linked with that, is the G20 equipped to promote that, or should it be supported in other ways? Francesco Profumo.
Thank you, Nicolas. Dear Nicolas, thanks for the kind introduction. It's really a great pleasure to join the 2021 virtual edition of the Global Solutions Summit. I think that infrastructure will play a pivotal role in leveraging recovery in the aftermath of the pandemic. COVID-19 has served to highlight the essential role that infrastructure can really play to keep economic and social activities going. At the same time, COVID-19 has exposed systemic vulnerabilities in the sector and within the society as a whole. For this reason, to successfully respond to the current situation, we can no longer afford to adopt the business as usual approach to infrastructure. We must leverage investments in quality infrastructure that can respond to challenges like climate change, rising urbanization levels, and ecological degradation, but most importantly, that can be accessible for all and everywhere in an affordable and equitable way. An increasing attention to social outcomes, taking a people-first and outcomes-focused approach will ensure all citizens have equal access to the infrastructure services they need. We should not forget inclusion. Many developing countries and emerging markets were already facing financial difficulty, even prior of the pandemic. Multilateral cooperation will be important to overcome the underlying causes of infrastructure gaps in these countries, not only through funding, but also through supporting capacity building and the development of bankable infrastructure projects. In this context, the G20 nations have an important role to play. Over 11 trillion US dollars have been deployed to support the post-COVID economic recovery. Stimulus spending will be key, but we need to be strategic and innovative. G20 countries need to implement the recovery policies targeting infrastructure that can increase spillover effects and co-benefits on redistribution and social inclusion. The goal is to make sure that no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Riyatu, I think a number of these issues highlighted also echo yesterday evening Finance Minister of Indonesia presentation of the G20 priorities. At this moment, how would you say the G20 has to change its rationale regarding infrastructure investments to include social, environmental, distribution perspectives? Riyatu.
I think my explanation is more on the experience of Indonesia. And I think this is the right time for emerging countries, maybe for other countries also to balance type of infrastructure investment, not only on the economic, but also on social and environmental infrastructures, especially given this period of COVID-19, the burden is disproportionately affected much higher for poor population. So we need to focus on that problem. So infrastructures for improving income distribution should be a priority. And in this case, social infrastructures like on health, education, and housing are an example of infrastructure projects that are equitable. So it has the potential to also support it by society as well. So I think at this time, maintaining and also increasing level of infrastructures going forward need to be priority to catch up also the reversal of social and economic development. Example for the case of Indonesia in 2020 during when it is already a pandemic of COVID-19, the country can still maintain its public infrastructure spending level at 400 trillion rupiah, but actually the size of social infrastructures, although there is an increase on health spending, it is still very low, 3% of overall infrastructure, public infrastructure spending. So I think on the proportion, we need to focus on that type of infrastructure as well. Also, I hear from keynote from Dean Sonobe, economic, social, and environmental infrastructures can complement each other. So if the country already emphasize and has a strong path on economic, it can also, I think, strengthen the impact by also balancing with social and environmental infrastructures. And yeah, I think that's my perspective on this issue.
And that highlights a considerable change, right? While we are talking about, and we will talk later in this discussion about digitalization, technological progress, smart infrastructure, infratech, and etc. But we can see at this moment, there is also a priority regarding social infrastructure, environmental infrastructure, and that was highlighted very well by Dean Sonobe in his opening remarks. Arun Myra, you have been working on those issues for many years. Riyadh just mentioned that 3% in social infrastructure was definitely too low. Would you say that we should use the momentum of the G20 to come up with a common rationale of 5, 10, 15% in social infrastructure to rebalance the conditions of development?
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Before we gauge how much is required in terms of money, we should be clear about for what it is required and it will be wisely used. So let me go back. When I was a member of the Planning Commission of India, one of the responsibilities the Prime Minister gave me was to look at our progress on urbanization, which was doing very, very badly. We needed money. We were wishing to attract from investments from around the world to invest in our urban infrastructure because the returns would be high as India grew. So here's a conference that I was in where we had investors coming in from New York, from Wall Street, and from other financial centers in Europe. And we met at the Taj Mahal Hotel in Bombay, which is at the south of Bombay, and the airport is in the north, and you got to travel for a couple of hours in those days past the world's biggest slum in Bombay, which is called Dharavi. And we met there. And the question was, what infrastructure does the city need? And there was this thing that Bombay is the engine of growth. It contributes so much to the GDP, and we need more money. So we need infrastructure to bring in these investors very conveniently, to attract them to come and invest in the city. So the question arose, for whom do you want the infrastructure? And at the same time, I read a wonderful, eye-opening book by Professor Jeb Brugman of the Michigan University. It's called Welcome to the Urban Revolution. And he starts like a scientist. He said, we keep talking of world-class cities, and maybe Shanghai is becoming one, Singapore is, Bombay certainly not. How does one first decide what are the criteria before one then looks at the cities? And so he said the process of urbanization is a process whereby people come closer and closer together, they agglomerate more densely, physical distances are reduced, as well as social distances amongst them are reduced. So there's more creativity, there's more interaction, there are more transactions, and thus growth happens. So he said, let's see which cities in the world which are larger than 1 million persons have resulted in the largest increase, the fastest increase in incomes of people who, say, start at level A and then reach a level B with the least amount of public support. Means they themselves generate whatever capital infrastructure they need to grow themselves. And he did this, and the survey his students did found that the world-class city was surprisingly Dharavi, the very city that the investors were saying, we need to get rid of it. It's unattractive. And so Dharavi had attracted people for 60, 70 years from around the country, different religions, speaking different languages, all densely together. And they created so much entrepreneurial activity, looking after themselves and contributing to that Bombay growth that we were talking about. Yet, the perspective was of the financiers and the big experts in urbanization that is a slum, that is not even a city. And so we got to change our minds about what are the infrastructures required to enable human activity to happen very well. There are three infrastructures. One of them is the physical infrastructure on roads and services and water and sanitation. Then there is the public services infrastructure for public health and education within the community, for the community. And the third is the governance infrastructure, how people take decisions about what is required in their community. So Dharavi was not considered a city, so the money was not coming into the physical infrastructure, and therefore it was a slum. But the other two infrastructures, and certainly the governance infrastructure, was very, very strong. So what is the infrastructure required for good governance, democratic governance of a city? And here one recognized there were two conflicting principles, that in the world of investment and capital, the decision rights lie with those who have more money. If you have $10 in a project and someone else has $1, you have 10 times the number of votes. But in a democracy, in a democratic social system, every person with a beating heart, whether he has $10 or $0, has an equal right in what should be done and how it should be done. And so we've got a clash here at the moment between two big forces that are changing lives of everybody. One of them is capitalism, and its decision rights are with capital. And the other is democracy, and the decision rights are with people. And so decisions to be taken about what happens in a city, we have to combine these sometimes opposing forces in taking the best decisions for the people who live in. I said city, you can expand this to a country and to larger. So there is a governance infrastructure that needs fixing before we can then improve, if I would say, the social services infrastructure and take the right decisions about what is the concrete and steel infrastructure that the city needs.
Thank you very much, Arun. And this leads directly to another very important question as for the where is the financial leverage and who benefit or who are part of this infrastructure. There are two issues which are brought up consistently within the G20 and overall regarding infrastructure development. One is digitalization, one is the role of the private sector, right? Not to mention that yesterday, Minister Giovannini from Italy mentioned that accounting systems would be another kind of background infrastructure. But regarding digitalization on the one hand, private capital on the other hand, just a quick round of comments on those two issues, maybe starting with you, President Profumo, since this is an issue within the G20 and the G20.
Yeah, as the Minister Giovannini rightly said yesterday, we needed to bounce forward. This means that we need not only to recover and be back to the pre-crisis positions, but to emerge stronger and more resilient by intensifying the transition toward a more sustainable path. To accomplish this, the future infrastructure agenda should contain important transformations in the way infrastructure is financed and developed. Since public budgets will not be sufficient to close the infrastructure gap, restoring to private sector financing is the way forward. To do that, it's really important to make the most effective use of innovative finance solutions that can unlock private capital for the right infrastructure project. That's projects that are financially viable, climate smart, inclusive, and resilient. The creation of a positive enabling environment is a necessary condition for this to happen. Sound policies, effective institutions, transparencies, and reliable contracts are key enabling factors. The adoption of new technology can also help to make infrastructure investment a more attractive proposition. Technology will be imperative to shape the way we plan, build, and operate infrastructures. Thanks to innovation like blockchain, digital twins, the Internet of Things, infrastructure of tomorrow will be smarter. These tools allow companies to employ their resources more efficiently and help to protect the environment, health, and safety. At the same time, we know that enhanced data will play an integral role in achieving better outcomes. Infrastructure is now generating large amount of data that can be harvested to inform operating, maintenance, and investment decisions. Proper data analytics and data storage can help to increase the value for money, improve system design quality, reduce networking, transaction, and transportation costs, and support the quality of services by monitoring systems. For example, the application of an integrated digital platform for the infrastructure sector can facilitate data sharing across the whole infrastructure value chain, enabling cross-border participation, enhancing collaboration among value chain participants, including SMEs, and focusing on end user needs. Thank you.
Iron Myra, a quick comment on those aspects, either digitalization and unlocking private capital, and then I will turn to Riatu.
But the thought was about bouncing forward. I love that expression that we heard, for which we need to have resilience. And I would say that the resilience comes out of social capital. It's things that money can't buy. And so therefore, when we think about building more resilience into our economies and social systems, we have to consider how to build the social capital. So there's a social technology, a governance technology. I think that's primary before we take decisions about even the digital technology. Because we can see what's happening with digital technology. It's making societies less democratic, more divided. Whereas at this time for resilience, we need more social cohesion. So I would come again to say that I really commend what I heard yesterday and been hearing for some time from Dennis Noah about the new dashboard that is being recommended, the SAGE, for assessing the condition of our societies and our economies. SAGE is solidarity, age is agency. Then G is, of course, the gain and the money part, which we have lots and lots of ways to measure. And then environment, which is becoming an important one. And we got ways of assessing the condition of the environment. But I feel that, as was pointed out to us also, the G and the E have become closer and closer. That is the finance and the environmental side. But the S and the A, which are the human side, the solidarity and the agency, we haven't put it at the center yet. In fact, that's the center before we start considering the money required for the economy, the livelihoods, as well as on the improvement of the environment. So I did want to say the data about what do we need, the data about the condition of solidarity, and the data about the quality of agency in people's life. What sort of data would this be? And we must get it first.
And Riyatu, you've been working a lot on these issues on how infrastructure can support the local economy, MSMEs, but also cross-border coordination, upgrade the ability of the administration also to serve people. So along these priorities of coping with new technologies and addressing completely changing and rising social needs, where would you locate the infrastructure priorities?
I think a comment also opinion from Arun Maira is, I think a good example is in the early outbreak of COVID-19. It is not a government response that quite fast. It's actually bottom-up approach, community level. We see a collection of data, or we see all on donation and approach to understand somehow to help each other within the community. So it is not only the government, but also this is the stakeholders, what you said as community, society, and private sectors. And in the case of emerging country as Indonesia, I also excited how actually before it is not accessible on the data, government starting to open the data, because it is what requested by the society. They want to know whether the government handling this pandemic quite good. There are also comparison from other countries and global context. So it is benchmarking with other countries also. So it is a start, I think, start investing on database because we don't know on how to respond. Policy option would be limited if there is no reliable database. And also in the case of, especially on supporting micro and small medium enterprise, this is the area that also given mostly are informal. The data is quite limited. So the response to help these sectors are also not as, not as quite direct with the formal medium to large companies, for example, or state-owned enterprise. So I think multilateral cooperation, G20 has experience, EU has experience on this. It can also be shared on knowledge sharing to other regional cooperation with the case of cross-border cooperation and also investment on database and supporting a small and medium enterprise on human capital as well as on technology adoption in this area.
Thank you very much. And I think this is a very, very important point. So we have a couple of minutes left to address one very important issue, which was highlighted also by Dean Sonobe in his opening keynote. Now that the infrastructure issue, we can see it changing in front of our eyes, right? And it is far-reaching across very different issues. How can think tanks join forces and cooperate to address simultaneously those different issues together or within the G20, within the Sherpa track, within the infrastructure working group and others? Maybe a first comment on that by Riyatu, then Irene, Myra, and then Francesco Profumo, if you would agree. Riyatu?
I think this forum, GSI, Global Solution Summit, is also one of the initiative when many think tanks and also multi-stakeholders together discussing on the issues and come up with the solution or how is actually addressing the challenge on development issues. And myself, thank you, Nicola, for inviting me. This is also a new opportunity for me. Like my research institute is more on domestic issue, but now I think we are also by knowledge sharing, also we also learn on know-how, and I think multilateral regional cooperation, especially in the context of environmental infrastructures. I think it needs is already quite strong, but I mean, without involving think tanks, it might be the advocation of the issue cannot. Maybe it cannot be used to push government to actually move faster for like adopting environmental standard, or focusing more on the infrastructure that also consider on redistribution.
Okay, thank you so much, Riyatu. Arun, we have like less than 3 minutes left, but I know you have a recommendation on this aspect.
Very quickly, the problems that we are facing in the world, which are in the SDGs, environmental problems on big set, we've got a whole lot of economic problems, another set, and we've got a set of social problems, very primary social problems, a third set. Now, we have think tanks who are economic think tanks and, banking sector, financial sector think tanks, and we have think tanks who are environmental think tanks, and we have some think tanks who are concentrating on the social issues to do this. Now, all these three sets of issues play together everywhere, like Riyatu said, also in cities in Jakarta or anywhere. The social issues, the environmental issues, and the financial issues all blend together in particular ways in different parts of the world. So we do need cooperation amongst the think tanks up there, like is happening over here in the discussions. But most of all, we need cooperations amongst the people who understand the environmental issues locally, the social issues locally, and the economic issues locally, the cooperation there. The complex problems that the world is facing today, global problems, can only be solved by local cooperation at the local levels. So in a way, I heard the Chancellor Merkel say that global issues require global solutions. I beg to disagree. There's some global issues like central production of vaccines, which is limited stock and equitable distribution. That requires global solutions. But these other issues, which are the real issues about resilience in the environment and the societies, require cooperation locally. So we need to have local solutions cooperatively found by communities, supported by experts. And then we're going to solve these big global problems. And we are going to have to build resilience in the world in this fashion. Thank you so much, Aaron. President Profumo, the final words of our discussion.
Yes. The role that the T20 and all the engagement groups should play in setting the agenda is to provide ideas and concrete policies, measures to implement it. Think 20 serves as the ideas bank of the G20. For its capacity to bridge technical skills with the hands-on policy making, the T20 has a distinctive ability to set the seeds for present and future discussions, to provide sound and independent evaluation, and to advocate key policy vision in the public sphere, capitalizing on the know-how and skill of experts and researchers across the globe.
That's perfectly clear. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Riyatu Mariatu, Arun Myra, and Francisco Profumo. This was a very useful and important discussion. We have 15 more minutes for those who can join and wish to join for an open discussion, echoing Arun Myra's call for binding of experts and binding with experts and people. So please meet us in the chat room together with the distinguished panelists to follow up on this discussion. Thank you very much.